Welcome everyone to our first in-person, I guess second and a half, because we were in person-ish. Yeah, we've got the band together this time. We are Alchemist session, and the goal of these sessions really for us is to educate the two markets that we're trying to bring together. The crypto market, the advertising market, by bringing people like yourself, Andrew, on to talk about the market in general, and just, chew the cud for an hour basically, because we like sitting in front of cameras. But so Andrew, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that'd be great. Because who we are.
So my name is Andrew Morsy. I work in the advertising technology space. I was introduced to me through Neil. Neil's a friend and someone I've worked with for a few years in the industry. So that's basically what I do.
He's also a big Liverpool fan, so we've
cancelled. Yeah. So there's an inside joke with Neil that he sounds like he's from North London. He lives in North London, but claims to be a Liverpool fan. And he's already agreed that at some point in the future, he will buy us a box at the Emirates. Just take it to them and finally come back to the team who really supports him. That's really
just add it to that list of things you've promised people.
Yeah.
He's going
to trade in his Liverpool season tickets for an Arsenal season ticket, which I'm very happy about. So we are the Alchemy team. So Adam, Neil, and myself, I'm CEO, Neil's Chief Commercial Officer, and Adam is COO. We've all worked in digital advertising, probably combined for 30 years for our sins, and we still want more. So it's a great industry to be in, right? But Andrew, just to kind of kick things off, it would be great to give us your take on advertising, I guess the application of blockchain, because it was spoken about before, like 2018.
Yeah.
Where you think that's going to lead us to?
Yeah, so 2021 is definitely a year where you can see, I think, some of the things that were driving all the excitement 3 or 4 years ago actually coming to fruition, right? And it was definitely one of those instances a few years ago where the term blockchain entered the advertising technology space. And in doing so, it kind of fell foul of being one of the new things that enters ad tech. Right? And it's a naturally cynical industry. At the end of the day, the principles of advertising haven't changed, but a huge amount of the ways that media is transacted and bought and sold have, and it ultimately has become automated and reliant on technology. So when you have an industry that's reliant on technology, and then you have a new technology, I would argue a paradigm shift, then you get salespeople and you get money being sort of, created around the launch of this new technology. So when blockchain arrived in ad tech, there were a host of companies that kind of stuck it quickly into their product marketing collateral and went out to market and tried to make money off the fact that they had access to a blockchain, right? And as as most of the people I'm sure that would ever view this video would understand, a blockchain in itself is not a tremendously exciting thing in terms of what it actually is. But it's the principles of what it allows that motivate me to get excited about these kind of projects, because it allows you to transact between two parties without having a middle man or middle layer verify it. And if we think about advertising, it is perfect for that, with ad tech especially. So over the last 10 years, I've been right in the middle of watching ad tech get a reputation for being a middleman tax. Okay, so a lot of the criticism that's thrown at this big pot of advertising called programmatic is that you have to pay a tax to the technologies to allow your ads to go from creative itself to publisher's page, right? And it's always become a necessary evil. Like, in order to operate efficiently, you have to have all this technology in the middle, right? So it's ripe for disruption, definitely. And the things that blockchain brings are efficacy. So the ability to make it verifiable and ultimately allow the person who's spending the money to know exactly how much of it reached the end publisher. And I think very importantly for publishers, because they are one of the two primaries, right? It's advertisers and publishers. Without them, it doesn't work. Everyone in the middle is exactly that. They're in the middle, right? So publishers, they're crying out for something like this. And my gut feeling is that, like anything new that you take to a publisher, they'll roll their eyes a bit at having to implement these things and having to be part of it. But it is a next generation move, right? Blockchain will take many forms. There are many companies that operate blockchains, and there are many things built on top of them. But ultimately, you'll see it be pervasive, right, across finance, across and the internet in general. So what you guys do in Alchemy is exciting to me because you're going to give all the different entities in the advertising ecosystem a chance to to take part in this much more transparent exercise of exchanging media.
Yeah, I mean, like, even what you said, like the transparency, right? And we were talking briefly about this before we started. It's if you're trader A at agency B, you don't ever have a full picture of everything that's going on. So that's pretty unique, right? There's a lot of financial industries where you'll see every transaction that's happening, and even more so in crypto industries, right? Where you can see individually which wallet has which amount, what was traded over what 24-hour period, aggregated across a number of exchanges. And from that kind of glut of data, you've seen people that write algos that help you trade more effectively, right? And that was always for me the promise of programmatic advertising. The premise was that rather than have account managers and BDs, it's analysts and traders, right? It's much, much similar to the financial market, but because they saw such a tiny sliver of the data, you make a decision, you think, oh, this is going to increase my yield, and then ad performance dives, and you're like, I don't understand why it's happening because I can't see all the information I need. And that is an issue, right? As a publisher, when you are responsible for all of the information that's being traded, but you can't see all of the information being traded and who bought it and who sold it, you get to this issue where it becomes massively inefficient, right? And I worked in ad tech my entire life. I love it. It's why I wanted to kind of come in and try and help fix it, because we don't think that people are necessarily doing it wrong. Ad tech providers provide legitimate services like fraud verification. The ability to deliver an ad digitally is not something that would happen without ad tech providers, because advertisers are too hard pressed serving their clients, brands, and publishers. Their main role is providing content, telling a story, being journalists, whatever it may be, providing free information. These are all kind of secondary to their main purposes. So you've seen, not for a lack of want or a lack of effort, but just a lack of resource, really, that you've had to work with ad tech partners. And the kicker for me is that it's, in some instances, some created more work than others. Like I always remember in the past where you'd get an email from a planning publisher when, have you served this ad here? Who's this ad come from? And I could just imagine what that was like in a publishing website, publisher, where it's like, holy crap, we've served a gambling ad on our child's website. Where'd that come from? Because they get the flack. They have to then kind of follow up the chain, and that can take days. And while that's happening, the plug's been pulled. So revenue's gone down the hole. And
it's kind of very impressive that you'd say that, because in the past we've had exactly those kind of conversations.
Yeah, we did. Neil and I won't go into the sort of nitty gritty of it, but we had to collaborate through a car crash, which basically involved it was tobacco companies' ads appearing on Talking Tom. I mean, mistakes will always happen. I think what you're going to see if blockchain is correctly implemented in ad tech is a big shift in the way that companies are able to operate, right? And a lot of the time when you bring technology in and say it's the next big thing, everybody kind of says, yeah, of course, how's this really going to change things? I think if you look at the amount of time a company like any mid-sized agency or any large agency spends on reconciliation and validating what's gone on to which partners and then subsequently invoicing them, you can give back that amount of time and money that can be invested in what the company purports to do, like creativity and planning and strategy. That is a revolutionary thing. And the blockchain infrastructure that you guys are rolling out is fundamentally capable of giving back a huge amount of time and money to the industry. And we should all be excited about that, because that will drive a next wave of growth and innovation, right? So people will stop focusing on things, not to throw shade, but like a huge part of the industry for the last 5-10 years has been companies walking around saying, we can help you, know that your ads are, genuine and things like that, right? I mean, that's not a great place to be for the industry. Right? And we should aspire to more than having billion-dollar valuations against companies that police ad serving, right? So for me, I think if you can get to a point where publishers and advertisers have got a real-time infrastructure that allows ads to be transacted between the advertiser and the publisher's page, and there be this clear proof of what's gone on that nobody disputes because it's all on the blockchain and nobody can edit, and it's resilient and immutable, then that creates a completely different relationship for those two players. And in terms of the ad tech infrastructure, it won't go away, but it will just change because you'll be able to innovate. So instead of saying we're a company that focuses on making sure that a transaction really happened, that the ad was really served, you may well find that kind of company becomes a company that focuses on improving the value of advertising in general. And I know that you guys are looking at ways that your tokens are used to create value and to give publishers value, and that's innovation, right? So that in itself is very exciting.
Because I think it's interesting as well. You talk about it's almost the opportunity loss as well, right? So it's like, just because you have to spend all this money, like verifying all these things and doing these other things, you're not doing like more interesting things.
Correct.
And other stuff happen from it.
Yeah, and look at Instagram, right? They verify all their own ads, so they don't have to worry about it because they know it's true. And if you look at the number and the kind of variety of ad products they offer compared to a publisher, which, without being rude, is a display ad, a video ad, a homepage takeover, or a native ad at the bottom of the page, right? And to date, that's the innovation in the market over the last 5 years. Is we've got a new format that pisses people off less, is basically what we're saying. It's a new way for you to get different media type, or this is going to annoy people less. Like, I worked for a long time for a native ad exchange, and it's similar to what we're saying, right? It was respectful ads, right? Ads that fit in. And I always used to give this sales pitch, actually. It's kind of a funny story about why native ads truly work. And it was to do with soy milk. Bear with me here, it's a bit mental, but the people that invented soy milk originally, when it was stocked in grocery stores, it was in the kind of cupboard aisle, the dry goods aisle, and they didn't sell anything. So they made a choice to move it into the refrigerator section. So now as a consumer, you go to the supermarket, it's like milk, not milk. What's this? And so they tried it, and soy milk really kicked off. And the premise behind that was the native ad looks like content. It fits into where it is, but it's slightly different, and that piques your attention. And you can see that happen today, right? Like there's macro levels, but oat milk, it was put in the fridge section with the milk. So like, soy milk, oat milk. It's kind of that repeated again. It's something that's similar, but different enough to pique your interest. And that's what we're really excited about, is that because there's this open RTB 2.5 standard that exists right now, that essentially is just a JavaScript library of conditions that you have to meet to transport a bid request from an advertiser to a publisher and vice versa. We can integrate with that system that exists already. We don't have to create a new standard. We don't have to get adoption of that new standard. We just slip into what exists already. To kind of tie it back to this soy milk story, is it's like very similar, but it's slightly different. And the difference here is it's cheaper. There's more transparency. There's more customizability on the features that you can offer. You can take back a lot of the money that you lost, and as you were saying, reinvest that into a creative team in an agency. They already have amazing content, branded content teams. Blow those out. That's clearly what is doing very well on Instagram, right? And other social media platforms. Or maybe engineering teams. Every publisher I've ever spoken to said we put it to the bottom of the engineering list. So we'll now have 5 more engineers and improve user experience. So you have more dwell time and you have more engagement with ads because there's fewer ads. And what we're suggesting here, and I think it's why we'll talk about it a lot, is that we're not coming in and saying, turn this off and that goes on. It's when we're incremental changes to tiny different parts of the marketplace, where the sum of all those parts then mean more yield for a publisher, more transparency for an advertiser, and a considerably better user experience for a user. So you're then kind of re-establishing that intended value exchange we preach about all the time, is where I go to a website to get content for free. I understand that content has to be paid for, so I'm happy to have some of my preferences shared to see a relevant ad that aligns with the article I'm seeing, if it's a contextual-based solution, or until the end of the year, I suppose, behaviour-based targeting through cookies. And that is a big topic I guess we should segue into, because IDFA's disappeared as of last Wednesday, and the uptake was not particularly good. I think 40% of people...
Consumer says no.
Yeah. And it's like, it's one of the, like, when you're presented with the option, like, we're going to track you, like, no, you're not.
it's how the question's asked, isn't it? So disclaimer, I work for a sizable contextual advertising business, so I am I'm all about the death of the cookie. Sorry for any cookie-based companies that might watch it. So, to my point there, it is about how you ask the question to the consumer. The consumer in ad tech is actually too often the sort of the last consideration, right? So there's a massive amount of sales and marketing that goes on in the ad tech industry around infrastructure, whether it's an exchange or an SSP or an ad server, and actually none of those things are ever in any way apparent to the consumer. Right? The consumer simply sees the end product, which is the ad, and they're aware of the product and service of that. In terms of consumer opt-in and areas like that, generally the consumer wants their cake and eat it. Right? Yeah. They typically, I would argue, your average person on the street who's not extremely literate in the ways of the internet simply wants to be able to go online for free, absolutely for free, and that's the primary thing. Ads, non-intrusive, and by non-intrusive, I mean, given the majority of time spent on mobile, full page, interstitials and so on. So anything that we can do to win back and educate through exchanges, right? So things like rewarded video don't necessarily have the greatest reputation, but the consumers understand it. Yeah. And if you actually take a product or a service like that to market, it's a far more honest form of advertising, because people, I will watch, if I'm playing a game, I'll absolutely watch a branded ad to get the next part of the. So that is a value exchange with consumer. Almost all display doesn't have that. It's just in your face, based upon a targeting or non, in some cases. So look, I think, what you're presented with now is an industry that has got a real requirement to up its game. There's a lot of money in the internet advertising space because the internet has got bigger. Yeah. And it's grown despite its inefficiencies, not because of how efficient it is. It's like there's so much more time spent online now than ever before. Yeah. 12, 15 months of COVID has just accelerated it beyond belief. The biggest companies in the world, internet companies, you'd almost have to be, it's almost ridiculous that you could fail because there's money has to come online, right? So companies that don't advertise online, it's unheard of. But what I think you will see is that it has to get more efficient. Yeah. And certainly when you look at how money is distributed, we're now reaching a point of maturity where you've got 4 or 5 large companies in the West and maybe similar in the East, and they're taking 8 out of 10 new dollars, right? If you don't want that to continue to get worse, then you have to make sure that the ecosystem outside of those walled gardens is actually effective. Yeah. And blockchain is certainly an opportunity for that to happen. But it has to be capitalized on. And what I mean by that is you have to make sure that it doesn't go down the path of being seen as a feature. So a company that is now using blockchain also, that isn't the case. It's an infrastructure. It's the principles of the business that you're building that will provide the value. Yeah, it's just like there's sometimes you see like a dry cleaner. So I've got my inventory book on the blockchain. It's like, well, why? Right? Yeah. And sure, you always say this. It's like blockchain will truly be adopted and ubiquitous when you don't know you're using it. Right? Like same with any technology, electricity. Even the internet, I kind of understand how it works, but I couldn't create the internet. But everybody uses it. You get WhatsApp calls from people that would, my mum, 70 odd years old, she would tell you she doesn't know anything about the internet, but she can FaceTime you. Yeah. Right? And so the internet has been made for her. It's been put into a format that she can make calls on the internet. Yeah. Right? And the benefits of that are clear to her. With ad tech, it will go the same way. Like the initial resistance will be, this is more infrastructure, this is more engineering work, this is more development. But it's almost like a renovation. So you've got this old house, it needs to be overhauled if you're going to be able to live in it for the next 20 years. And certainly, brand advertisers are aware of the percentages around things like waste. If you look at the big FMCG brands, they actually do make a concerted effort to have publisher direct relationships. They don't want money leaking. They certainly don't want ads being served outside of where they want them to be. So blockchain gives you the tools to create transparency and control across these players in the ecosystem. And off the back of that, off the back of trust comes everything. If you find that people are not having to niggle at each other every month or quarter about how much was spent and why, and having to invest in verification products at enormous cost, because that's what you need. It's, I think a remarkable opportunity.
It's one of the things that I kind of talk about quite a lot, because you got Mark Pritchard's speech in 2017, right, where he's talking about, he's like, we need to drain the swamp, we need to get a more transparent system, we need to get more efficiency for our buck. But the next year you've got Keith Weed at the same conference, and he's coming out and saying it goes further than that, because what's happening is impacting on consumer trust. And consumer trust is the number one thing. You can spend money inefficiently and it's not going to damage your brand. But if you damage the trust and the faith that the consumer has in your brand or your property that you're talking to people via, it's hugely detrimental.
Yeah, I can't think of many industries where both the buyer and the seller feels like they're being ripped off. I mean, it's crazy. Just that kind of value leap that goes on. And it's going to return accountability, right? I think more than anything, all these things just boil down to accountability. Like, what was sold to who, when, and why, and that's kind of something that's not going to.
The industry's got a headache, and we've been giving people paracetamol rather than telling them to exercise and drink some water, right? So it's almost the behaviour will change. I mean, I think the technology itself is particularly interesting because for many years, there was one entity in the blockchain space, and then you saw this huge increase in the amount of companies that were able to produce blockchain technology, and then off the back of that, you have tokenization, and then suddenly everybody can buy them and access them. So it's almost become like a very rapidly adopted technology, almost not by accident, but not in the way that perhaps some of the companies that built their technology intended. I think there's, to be clear to anybody who's listening to this, ad tech is a massive opportunity. This is going to be, multi-industry, right, across. I think certainly, you're looking at what's happening with decentralized finance and how that's just gone completely crazy in the last 12 months. The way that the healthcare industry will use this. I'm particularly interested in some companies that I'm seeing who are investing in using their blockchains for things like governance records, health records, and education records in countries where, if I may call them, third world countries, where they've got considerably different problems to the ones that we face in the Strand on a nice sunny day. So to my point, right, blockchain, it's easy for somebody or anybody in the ad tech space to kind of sneer at blockchain, because what it sounds like to the uneducated, and I deliberately use that word because education is something that anybody can achieve. It's not a slur to call somebody uneducated. To the uneducated is that it sounds like the next greatest thing that the ad tech industry has produced to solve its own problems.
Yes.
And it's very much not. It's very much right back to the start of the conversation. It's another industry, the cryptographic industry, providing like a truly global opportunity for multiple industries, and if you're going to be that big about it, humanity, to change the way that it operates. And you've got right at the foundational part of it, principles of sound money and how you distribute value between people. Ad tech is a pretty, don't mind me saying, it's quite a soft part of this, right?
For sure.
So it's advertising, it's people trying to sell more product through, but at the same time, it's a massive industry. It's an industry that does need this, And I think that, what you guys have done is really smart and great to see, because you've gone to find, some best in class technology, and you've put the problem and the solution together. And I think the interesting thing will be is getting the adoption of it, getting the early pilots up and running, so that people can see the upside, right? Because once people see the upside, then they won't go back, and it'll be similar to the adoption of a lot of technology. I think, nobody will use bank cards, nobody's gonna use internet shopping. Like, they will, and once they do, it will be slowly, and then all at once.
Yeah, there's I'm not sure where I read this. Find it in Linux. It's not my study, but it was comparing a lot of technology solutions to human elevated lifts and then technology elevated lifts. So, like, in the early 1900s, when elevators were invented, there was this huge uptake in the number of elevator assistants, right? Because they had to run the lift. And then as technology improved, it became more automated, and then you don't no longer need someone in the lift to operate it. And it's like, if you kind of apply that to the ad world, like, okay, you started off where I would call someone and say, can I book X space on the front of X newspaper? And then it was, okay, can I do that digitally through your website? And then there was technology solutions that offered that. And then programmatic came in and started to automate it, but it wasn't quite as a nice solution as there was with the lift, right? It was a funny expression to give, but we really do feel that, like, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to deliver on the premise that advertising has, right? It's the way that you can trade ads programmatically is amazing. Like, the issue with billboards right now, and we're not talking about that, but that's a monopolized market, right? You physically have to own a massive space in somewhere popular for you to have any value. And that's what's protected their industry. Because if you look at publishers, you have platforms that have essentially co-opted content in something that's more popular. And I think particularly younger people don't give a shit where they get their content from, right? You don't know who you are when you're 18, 19, 20, 25, right? You start and you figure yourself out, your political opinions, and then who best supports that in terms of publication. And then you come out in your 30s, perhaps with like a Guardian membership and the Times or whoever it may be, because they represent what you think about the world. And I think Facebook have been like, dude, don't get to that point, because everything you wanted is in this one platform where there's no checks and balances.
Accountability. I think it's really interesting when you talk about the kind of the steps of technology, because I'm a little bit, as you'd like to remind me, a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
When I started working in the industry and I was buying inventory, I used to kind of print off an insertion order. I used to fill it in manually, with my pen, and I used to take it over to our fax machine, and I used to fax it to the publisher.
That's something what's up that?
I know. And then 2 years later, we're like, no, we've got the seismic change. We bought a scanner. And instead of faxing it, I would then be putting it in the scanner, and then I would be sort of emailing and demanding things.
One step right list. Yeah,
exactly. And that was, web ads were trained in that fashion as well. Before ad servers and before programmatic came in, and then programmatic came in, and it was It was a real watershed moment, right? This ability to transact in that fashion was hugely different.
Yeah.
But with that comes the same problems that you have with the fax machine and
It took a long time to get publishers to buy into it. I mean, I remember, so the early exchange that I worked with was a company called Right Media, and Right Media wasn't actually initially based on a real-time environment. It was based on like a mediation. So basically, if you were Neil agency, you have to go and speak to Andrew publisher and construct a link between you and that publisher within the exchange, and then that publisher would allow you to buy the inventory, and so it was pretty manual. And it actually took a while for exchanges to get liquidity from publishers and to do the business development work required to get publishers to push enough inventory in. So that work in the early days to get the buy and the sell side to adopt it. And then the early conversations were all about the quality of the inventory in there. Ultimately, the massive criticism in the first couple of years was it's unsold traffic. That's all that's in there. And so then came this, gold rush of data. It's not unsold inventory, it's audiences. Okay. Right, fine. However, it's packaging, right? And there's nothing ultimately wrong with that. And I think the point I'm making here is that publishers have got a right to make money off the quality content they produce. Yeah. They've got a better chance of doing that if it's transparent to a large number of buyers at the exact same time as to what's available. Mm-hmm. And what they're getting is exactly what it says on the tin, right? Yeah. And that's where you're going to see, I think, better data exchange between the publisher and the buyer. So that it's not just the ad unit size. Yeah. It'll be, here's 10, 20 pieces of information about that ad placement. The company I work with at the moment, that's what we do, right? We focus on trying to help buyers understand the ad placement very, very well before they actually go into the auction. But blockchain will, just lay it all out, right? And it gives the opportunity for publishers to almost repackage their supply. If you think about it, how do you advertise your wares in a world where, it's available to a huge amount of people at the same time, and also you're going to get a better price for it because that buyer is not having to pay multiple people just for the benefit of reaching the buyer.
Yeah, you kind of get closer to the true value of what you're buying, right? Because you haven't had to pay the piper to cross the bridge to go by. Do you know what I mean? This is the route to do it, and it's like if you imagine the world at the moment, like publishers are kind of looking through the letterbox almost, and it's like, well, okay, there's people that have the keys that don't let you in. They kind of, you can see what's in here. That's what you could have won almost, and it's like, well, no, like we said, like saying the whole way through, the people that matter on the internet and that are going to keep it going are us in this room, the users, the advertisers, and the publishers, right? Without those three, nothing happens, right? No one's reading the information, no one's creating the information, and no one's kind of powering that motor to go on. And it's quite big, really, because when you think about what these publications are, and I soapbox a little bit here, it's just like it's independent journalism, right? Which is key to free speech, right? Which is then imperative to a democracy, and you can kind of see every day like how that's playing out, right? So if I turned up here and stopped you all like, right, we're going to do a talk about alchemy exchange, but have you heard the world's flat? I've been in this Facebook group, like all these experiments, like legit, I'm telling you, it's dead flat. You'd be like, Ben, shut the fuck up. Take the tinfoil off your hat, the world's not flat, we've been on holiday around it, like what are you talking about? But now you go onto Facebook and it's like, no, it is flat. Here's some tinfoil, make it hat, and read this paper about this experiment we've done. We're going to get together in the desert later on, and Netflix turns up, and their laser's not quite pointing where it should be, and like, well, let's go back to the maths. And that's happened because there's no one saying that's not true. Like, shut up, what are you talking about? You kind of get into these echo chambers, which ultimately led to a topless Viking with tattoos thinking that he was going to take the government. Do you know what I mean? It's like, whoa, what's happened here? And it was good originally, right? You had my girlfriend's diabetic, like she's in a group and they share life hacks like it, and that's been great for her. It's like kind of a group of her friends that will talk about being diabetic, right? And that's the good side. But where there's no balances like you have on a newspaper, like if a publisher lies about someone, they will get sued for libel or something slanderous on TV perhaps, and it's because Facebook and platforms have co-opted these eyeballs. Publishers have had no choice but to kind of follow where their audience went, which has kind of polarized people. So like the left got more left and the right got more right, and the headlines were more sensational because publishers are desperate to stay afloat. So they have to chase clicks. They write clickbait headlines. Yeah. We've seen it, the right rails were just like, someone steps over a puddle, you're like, I have to see it. Right? It's not good, right? It is good, but it's not good in my opinion. Like
it's no longer about, headlines used to be something that were printed on newspapers, right? And newspapers, obviously not clickable. And so people would write headlines, with the intention of framing the story. But now, almost the headlines become the point.
Absolutely.
And, the amount of, kind of clickbait and junk, empty pages really are just carrying out as a result.
Well, yeah, it's like the people that there's like headlines is like a tweet, right? It's 140 characters, and that's you get most of your story from it. But no one's looked into, and tracking human beings aren't designed to speak to a random group of strangers in 140 characters. We've never done that. You would speak to thousands of years ago the people that were in your immediate circle, and even hundreds of years ago people that were in your immediate circle, and all of a sudden I can say whatever I want in 140 or 280 characters, and I will only get responses from the people that really agree with me or people that vehemently disagree with me. And that's not a particularly nice place to be, right? Like,
unless it needs a shift, and then you make loads of money.
Yes, it's just like
my son's bang into crypto.
Yeah.
You never know what hides behind it. I know Peter Schiff's probably like sitting on like a couple of thousand Bitcoin. He doesn't care about anything, but yeah, he's been a wonderful kind of. I mean, he was originally painted as a baddie. He's not baddie. His original kind of, the establishment rail against him because he's a gold bug.
It's a boomer syndrome as well.
Of course, he's always rich. He's to be, he's old.
His son's really into Bitcoin, isn't it?
Massively,
like the internal battle of the family.
But
it's setting it out, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
You've got the wonderful thing about, because we were talking about this before the camera went on, like the interesting thing with so recently I've started to really open my eyes to the fact that the world is
flat. In my group,
completely flat. And that's what this is really all about.
Yeah, this is the globe. This is the globe we're on, right?
I hope this doesn't come out wrong, but I've started to find the views of younger people really interesting. Now when I hear from somebody or see somebody's comment and I find out they're 20-something, I'm far more engaged than I am with people who are the supposed wisdom. Right? And it's because I just feel like they're much more in touch with zeitgeist and what's happening and certainly in a space like the blockchain industry and the associated cryptocurrency space, inevitably it's a younger person's interest area. So I guess where I'm going with this is like you've got a wave of people that are not thinking in the way that the previous two generations thought, and they're being born into this ability to have a decentralized future, and they just completely dark to water. Like there's no concept of, but does this work or will this work? They just have accepted it completely, totally. And to actually see that happening with massive, ancient, greedy and foul industries like the finance industry and property industry, just bombs going off, like the actual foundations being taken apart by kids, people who aren't actually old enough to be their father, but they're just doing it they're not even doing it malevolently, they're just doing it because it's natural to them, it's fun, and what they're doing, I guess what I'm saying is they're owning their own future, and it's brilliant to see these. Who was it who was on TV the other day? Munger and Buffett. They're both in their 90s, and they're being held up as these people that we should go and interview about something like blockchain, which has been around for a decade or so, right? How? Why? And you'll know Michael Saylor, right? The sort of I would call him an activist, the activist CEO of MicroStrategy, and he's famous for putting Bitcoin on his company's balance sheet. And he was interviewed by this woman on American TV, right? And she was like, "So, quite to the accent, but what do you think about the fact that these two really experienced guys are rubbishing the entire industry around Bitcoin?" And he's like, "They're old enough to be your father. Would you go to your 96-year-old grandfather and ask him about the latest technology?" And it was just like, you probably wouldn't. And that is being ageist, because to an extent you have to be when you're talking about new things. Children and younger people inevitably adopt things earlier, right? Because they're still learning. So I feel like at the moment you've got a wave of connected youth, which we weren't connected in the 70s. You were where you lived. They weren't connected in the 80s. No, you were where you lived. You didn't get to speak to people in other countries in this way. You know, it's connected, mobilized, and arguably financed and independent youth coming through. brilliant.
Yeah, it's like
It's really, really, really brilliant. Like I've got every interest in like watching the next 5-10 years because there's going to be a host of rich, entitled white men overthrowing it. A long way. It's brilliant. It's great to see.
Because I think like I can't remember which point I was going. I do it, and again. This is a great phrase. I don't think I made it up. I'm not sure I got it from, but it's like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And it's like, okay, so Warren Buffett was one of the first value investors. He identified disruptive technologies, and that made him very wealthy. But then he's very wealthy now, so he's got something to lose. Whereas, like, if you just graduated, you're 21, and you look at your bank account and they get make 1% interest over a year.
Well, you wish.
Lucky.
Denmark just rolled out negative interest rates for anybody with over €10,000, minus 0.15%.
It costs you to hold money.
Why would you bother? And also they just go, then they print on the money machine and actually at 1% actually was 20%.
If you look at that part of it, so one of the biggest, I know we're off on a bit of a segue now, but it's all associated and people will be watching this for different areas of interest. And one of the greatest challenges I had in the last couple of years was trying to explain to people that a technology like Bitcoin is not, a scam just because it's new.
Yeah.
And it's not a scam just because it's replacing what everybody thinks is legitimate, like government-backed money. And when you break down the argument for people, I have had friends where the pennies drop and they're like, I'm like, you know how every year stuff's more expensive? You know how every year your money doesn't go as far? That's because you're the frog in a pan of water while it just heats up around you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they're like, so what's the difference with this? I said, well, it's not, it's the principles of it. It's the principles of that it's finite.
Yeah.
And, when you talk about, money, you're giving people money, but at the same time you're creating more of it. So what you've given them costs less, and you use that to control them, and then you create the infrastructure around it. Like it's kind of hugely exciting to think that the next generation of technologists, probably people in their 30s, I would say. These guys who have been through the first generation technologies and now in the second and third generation technologies, they are going to liberate, entire, entire nations from the mess that they're in.
It started off with the free flow of information, the internet, right? It was all about connecting computers of different universities and stuff like that. And now we can all learn anything on the internet.
Well, we did right.
The next thing that's going to happen is value, right? It's money added to that. And once you have free flow of information and money, those old industries, they don't really stand a chance because they try to build this thing that is immovable. And it's first time that, there's the democratization of money basically. And anybody can get in and anybody can do anything differently and create a system that is better than what exists now. I mean, it used to be the case that innovation was the hard bit, right? Consolidation was the easy bit. But we're suddenly getting to a point where that's not the case, where anybody can innovate and do something different.
And you can share it with anybody. I mean, the fact that you can effectively, through tokenization, you can crowdfund.
Yeah.
Enables entrepreneurship, which was previously so laborious and again privileged.
Yeah.
That removal of the requirement to have privilege to access things.
Yeah.
And everybody comes from a different position. Some people born into families where there is money and they know how to make money. And then a lot of really clever people born into situations where there's nobody knows how to make money, right? But now you've got the availability of the building blocks, which is internet connection and a device.
Yeah.
And then through that, the applications and online systems that allow you to do almost anything. So anybody can transfer value, anybody can run a business, anybody can communicate, share information. It's wonderful. And I think that when you realise how long a small select group of people have just bled, the rest of us. It's great to see it being thoroughly disrupted.
Well, yeah, people will scream. They don't know what they're doing. They're putting their money into a meme or whatever it may be. But it's like, well, look.
There has to be some failures. There has to be some failures because at the end of the day, human nature, one of the big characteristics is greed, right?
Yeah.
And self, right? So wanting to make money is normal. And I would say there's a percentage of people that are not interested in money, but then there's a much higher percentage of people that are, right? Because it's a vessel that allows you to liberate yourself. The cryptocurrency space will create a lot of money, and it will also, there'll also be some stories around people that lost a lot of money, right? But that's not unique to the cryptocurrency industry, and at the end of the day, it's allowed to happen. It's not, there'll be regulations pushed in by, companies or governments that try and control these things. But this is definitely not my quote. You can't kill an idea, right? The genie's out of the bowl, and all you see now is the action and then the reaction. So I think Bitcoin is probably the best example because of what it represents, and the fact that there is no CEO of it and there's no way to kind of put it back into its box. Nigeria banned the trading of cryptocurrencies, and then overnight it became like the most explosive market for it, right? So they had to rethink. And this is what's wonderful to see is it's like you can't tell people how their future's going to be once they've smelt a better opportunity. But there will be revolution.
Yeah.
It's that libertarian dream, isn't it, that we all aim for in crypto, really? And
Well, look, I mean, having to ask permission to own things and to operate your own money from an entity that doesn't
treats you like shit, basically.
Treats you like shit, and also just it's not fair.
Yeah.
So you're instantly taught through society. You're basically drugged through media and the way that everybody was educated through broadcasts from the government to do certain things. It's the right thing to do. It's what good people do. And to see so much free thought and it's little phrases that I've started seeing. Again, it's this. I think it's because I use Twitter a lot, and Twitter has got a youthful audience. You do you, I'll do me,
yeah.
And that's actually a phrase I've seen multiple people in their early 20s using. But what it actually represents to me is it's a great way of thinking. So you do what you want to do, I'll do what I want to do. And it's to say, why can't we create a society where everybody's allowed to do what they want to do? Society's built on rails that allow you to do that. Yeah. So it's not the Wonka elevator. You can go up, down, sideways, right? But you still have to exist within the infrastructure. You can't just be rogue and cheat people and scam people. But you can do what you want. And from the perspective of starting the financial industry and moving into the ad tech industry, blockchain is really liberating. But it's such a dry, complicated technology to explain to people. Yeah. That's where all the effort goes. And that's what happened in ad tech, to kind of go back to the point of our conversation, is the early blockchain companies, invariably what happens is you build a piece of technology, you take it to market, you have to hire a salesperson. Salesperson focuses on the what, not the why, because they're really trying to teach themselves because they're not an engineer. So they go to the meeting and they say, right, what we do is, and the person on site goes, and so there's this very, very small gene pool of people that will go in and say, forget what we do. Let's talk about the 2 or 3 things that you're going to be able to do as a result of this. You have 0 reconciliation, 0 fraud. Are you interested? 100% interested. Yeah. Right? And for the rollout of Alchemy, I think you've got a really great moment where people will realise that the technology has real world applications. You are not, you need competitors, you need a market, you need other companies to be doing these things. Otherwise, you're just the guy who's sort of shouting about what's coming next. So it's very exciting time.
Yeah, and I think that we've obviously all come from the advertising world, right? And like discovered crypto. And I think that I always say that crypto Twitter's in its like adolescence, right? Like if it first a kid and like there wasn't much adoption by the adults in the room, and then
you couldn't find anything about you couldn't find anything on Bitcoin when I started looking for it. It was 2016. The only things that you could find were articles about it being fraudulent.
Yeah.
And
crime.
Yeah, crime.
Funny.
And Mapbox, right?
Yeah.
And stuff that happened kind of before I got into it. And it was probably a few thousand people globally that were committed to it and were publicly committed to it and had put their personal brand against it. 2017 saw tremendous global investment in it. Really hysteria around price and people just chasing, putting in 10 and getting back 20 or whatever it was, right? And so then when there was an exodus of that retail money and there wasn't any institutional money to back it up, there came the natural comment of, and we told you that was a
The mills were.
but yeah, exactly, yeah. So that kind of watching it come round again this time, it's tremendously interesting because you think about going back to what I was saying earlier about the younger generation, how when they, I don't know, it's like touchscreen technology. If you put touchscreen technology in front of a kid, they don't think wow, they just think, of course it's like that.
Yeah.
So if you put that in front of a 4-year-old, they're trying to swipe their screen. And that is because they just have adopted things much quicker. So watching the cryptocurrency community explode on Twitter, you've obviously got layers of it. You've got people that are actually working in the industry who tend to be quite frustrated by the hysteria. They want to point out the seriousness of the applications.
Here for the tech.
Here for the tech. All these people. The cynical part of me thinks that a lot of them are already very rich. Therefore they're like allowed to not care about money because they have so much of it, right?
Yeah.
Then you've got like probably the most interesting generation of people who, I include you guys in that, who are building a future off the opportunities of it. Some of them are self-publicists, some of them are YouTubers, a lot of them are traders or supposed traders or however you want to call it, right? And then you have the general population, right? People who are just interested parties in it. It's great. You're allowed to get, all of this was going on when all other new things were invented. It just wasn't necessarily on the internet. When gold was discovered, there was a gold rush and all the businesses that went up around it and entire towns and cities and economies were founded on it, that just wasn't put on the internet. Right? And all we're seeing now is that behaviour, again, with a technology rather than a sort of a natural asset. But yeah, as I said,
one of our advisors said something very similar to that. Actually, we were on the phone with him a couple of weeks ago. And he lives in Cornwall. He said the community he lived in Cornwall at one point was the richest community on the planet. Yeah, because of tin.
You want to add another law?
For
another.
Yeah.
That was Henry, was it? Yeah. Bad line.
And then it passes. But they say the technology has just evolved from this it just happens to
there's a rising tide, if you will, and I think because of the internet, it's able to gather in people and just like everyone comes up. Because one thing I personally have been blown away by is just the people we've got in touch with in the community. Like everyone gets it, right? And they want to get involved and they offer their help, and it's like, wow, I'm like kind of blown away. We've all said this. It's just like people that have already been involved with us. It's incredible. I want to thank you guys because we've just got a good idea, right? And it's like, we thought we were crazy for a long time. I sat in a small box room and just spoke about this to myself and Neil and Charlie a lot of the time. And it's like, now we're talking about it. We speak to people like you and it's like, hey, fuck up. We think we maybe are the right kind of crazy, right? We just need to like measure it. And that's where I'm eternally grateful for just the corporate training I've had, right? And the rigor that you have to apply to a full-time job. Like, particularly in sales, like if you're not booking meetings, you don't follow up, then you don't hit your target, and then you're looking for a new job. And it's like, ad tech kind of made me, and it's like, I found this new technology and applied it to what I was thinking, and I was like, holy shit, this could actually be quite, and it's the first, in 2016, if I found this, I wouldn't have done it, right? Because PayPal won't.
Probably got broken between as well.
Exactly. It's like now it's like a different type. It's adoption. It's
People, I thought the same thing about it in the sense of I knew that I was very, very interested by it. I knew that I believed in it, and I knew that it was not going to go away. The challenge I had, I think, at that point, going back 5 years, was twofold. One was just real world practical things, like I have 2 young children, I have a mortgage. I wasn't in a position to join like a completely, new industry which had, being honest, nobody I knew working in it. So you would have to go and find people, right? So I guess I didn't have the minerals to do that at that point. Also, I think I just didn't see enough examples of where you could get involved with companies. Now you've got companies, expanding at a phenomenal rate, remote work, and also a lot of the early stage requirements for companies were for developers, right? So it was for people who can build the products, not so much people that would commercially adopt them. But at the end of the day, the interesting thing about this conversation today is it's convergence, isn't it?
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, you had Bitcoin and Ethereum as these two new technologies, and everybody was arguing and debating about the longevity and the validity of them in the first place. You fast forward 5 years, and there's no question of those things, right? That question is completely left the building. It's been really, really remarkable for me in the last 6 months to see how I've gone from having people just say, "All right, mate, whatever." And so I just stopped. I'm sure like you, I just stopped talking to certain friends about it, to having people say to me, "Yeah, no, completely in. I'm going to start doing these things now. I'm changing my behaviour." And that's kind of makes me realise that A, it's still really early, but also B, that we're probably underestimating where it will go.
Yeah.
Like once you see, because you think of all the projects that haven't been publicised yet, and the fact that nation states and governments, they're not doing nothing about this, right? They just don't market things until they're done, right? Because they can't, because they have a population to manage, right? So my point is that when you start seeing forward-thinking countries in developing regions of the world say, we've put all our healthcare infrastructure on blockchain. So that to me will be when you start to realise that it's bubbling up from underneath. And the time it takes to do the business development, like if you want to work with a local government, if you want to work with a multinational or a bank, those deals are 3-4 years. They're not months. So you're going to see this year, it's driven through the price of Bitcoin because everyone's excited about getting rich, and a lot of people will get rich. But by the by, once all that subsides, you will just continue to see the technology get adopted. And, things like, NFTs, like a completely new market being created off the back of, the industry is remarkable.
We are going to have to wind up this session.
So on the joys of shared office space, thank you all for tuning in or listening.
Cheers, thank you guys.
Cheers, mate. That was
and on to the next one.
Next one.
What up, everyone?